Hey YouTube, this is Kevin here, also known as Hippie. It's a nickname of mine that people call me. So, I'm making this video. Um, don't really know where it's going, don't know where it's gonna go, what it's gonna lead to, but I just felt obligated to talk about an issue that's constantly plaguing our nation, plaguing all of us, and that's the topic of mental illness. It's um, it's one of those things that isn't spoken about. Um, I come from a family where we very much sweep those things under the rug. It wasn't spoken about. It wasn't. It was all pray to God, and it'll go away. And many of us know that doesn't work. um, while I do respect that some people have their religions and things like that, and things that help them get through, didn't work for me. I am very much science based, so I know that this is a chemical imbalance, specifically talking about bipolar disorder. Um, Same goes with depression and anxiety and things like this. These are all things that plague us every day, and it's hard to live with. And I think that not enough people talk about it. So I was hoping that maybe this could lead to something where it's just again a casual talk about mental illness. A little about me. I'm 30. My name's Kev, hippie for those of you who know. I was born and raised in New York. Then moved to California for about I'd say about 5 or 6 years. Um, that's when I was diagnosed, and that's kind of where this journey begins for me. Um, I remember working two jobs. I was working at Apple, and also I was working at a French restaurant. And I remember just waking up one day and not feeling the same. Things just felt darker. Um, I didn't understand what was going on. I hadn't really had these feelings. I mean, at younger ages, I dealt with depression and things like that, and I'm sure the bipolar was showing itself. Um, but I didn't get the help that I needed. And when I was finally on my own, living, I had a roommate in California. When I was finally somewhat established, I guess you can say, I started to feel this feeling of, I don't know if you want to call it emptiness or just the sensation of nothing almost. I woke up and nothing mattered anymore. I didn't care about going to work. I didn't care about my hobbies. I didn't care about my relationship at the time. I didn't know how to manage, and all I can do was sleep. I eventually, thankfully, I got leave, approved leave from Apple, and that's where my journey kind of began with medication and doctors and therapists and psychiatrists. And I can't tell you how much of a headache all of this was. Just trying to find a therapist who understood, an affordable therapist, rather. Not just one who understood, but one who I can afford. Luckily, Apple, one thing that people may not know, I guess, unless you work for Apple, is that they offer 5 free counseling sessions with a therapist. And I can't tell you how much that made a difference in my life. Just being able to speak to a therapist about the things that were going on and things I didn't understand, and it helped me dramatically. But again, those things run out, and I didn't have the money to keep going. It was going to cost me around $200 to $300 an hour to go continue to see him, and I couldn't afford it, so I had to stop going. As for the medication, I was put on so many different medications. I can't even remember. Medication for depression, medication for bipolar, medication for anxiety, for sleep. I was taking at least 8 or 9 pills a day, at least 2 times a day, and I just couldn't see this being my life. I mean, I was only 27 maybe at the time, maybe 28, and I couldn't see the rest of my life. I just couldn't live with the fact that I would have to take all this medication all the time. Not to mention, I was passing out at work. I remember one situation where I was at work and I was helping a customer buy a product. And in the midst of him speaking to me, I remember getting a bit disoriented. What he was saying wasn't comprehensive to me. I almost like in the Charlie Brown show where you hear wah 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 wah. That's what I heard, and I tried to ground myself in a way where you're trying to, look around and see, hey, what's happening to me. And next thing I know, I'm on the floor looking up at customers because I passed out. Um, at the time, I didn't have a manager who was understanding at all, at all. I know a lot of us say this. I know a lot of us have horrible managers, but this, in fact, by far was the worst manager I've ever had. Um, Harassment, I mean, I remember him sitting me down one time and talking to me and telling me, your illness is taking its toll on your coworkers, that they're not able to properly. I'm trying to remember the exact words. What he said was along the lines of, I'm serving as a distraction for my coworkers because they can't do their job efficiently if they're worried about me. And to be honest, that's some of the coldest shit I've ever heard. I mean, you wouldn't say that about cancer. You wouldn't say that about someone in a wheelchair. You wouldn't even think that, let alone say it. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's important that we talk about mental illness and break the stigma, because it's so damaging. It's so damaging to keep all this stuff inside. And then when you do seek help, you're penalized. So the harassment continued from there on from my boss, and I eventually had to take leave. I'm so thankful that they offered me medical leave, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have had the time to at least get my life in some sort of order. Um, but yeah, just thinking back to it, it was a really difficult time. Sleeping all the time. They put me on Seroquel. Seroquel, I ended up gaining about 60 pounds in 4 months. I wasn't eating. All I was doing was sleeping. I was sleeping about, maybe, I would say, anywhere from 14 to 16 hours a day on this medicine. I couldn't function. When I was up, I was drowsy, groggy, just a zombie. And as much as they told me I'd get used to it, I never did. And I eventually had to stop taking it because I was just falling into a pit of misery. I've always dealt with weight problems, but 60 pounds overweight in just a few months is it's dramatic, and you start to measure your self-worth based on these little things like weight and how I'm feeling and all these things, and oh, am I working? And I'm not working. I'm disabled. And it was a roller coaster of emotions, and unfortunately I didn't have the right people around me. My girlfriend at the time was not supportive. I try to give her as much credit as I can nowadays, because it's a difficult situation to be in. I can't imagine what it may have been like for her to see someone who she loved not be that person anymore. I like to think I'm very ambitious. I try to help anyone I can. But when bipolar plays, it's when it sticks its head out. I'm a different person in a sense. It's a chemical imbalance. So there's not much we can do other than, you know, sometimes try and separate ourselves so we hopefully don't say the wrong things, um, and just kind of look out for our triggers and recognizing what our triggers are. Um, for me, it was horrible time, horrible, and I almost didn't make it out. I had several suicide attempts throughout my life, even before I was diagnosed. So this is an issue that had been going on for a very long time. Again, unfortunately, I didn't get the help that I needed. I just don't think that where we were as a society, not just in my family, but where we were as a society, people weren't ready to accept the fact that people, no matter what age, deal with depression. They deal with bipolar, they deal with mental illness, and it's something that it's debilitating. And it's more debilitating when people don't believe you, and they think you're either a troublemaker or, I mean, I remember being a kid and getting involved in all types of stuff, you know what I mean, going to parties and this and things normal kids do, but also drug use, abusing drugs and things like that. Thankfully, it was anything crazy. No heroin, no meth or anything like that. Not to knock anybody who has, because I get it, it's a struggle. But it got to a point where I was just indulging and just completely submerged in not feeling like, not feeling bad anymore, not feeling like myself. So anything I can do to numb those feelings of, you know, of sadness and helplessness and not understanding why you're crying. It's a journey. It's a roller coaster, and it took a long time for me to get to a place where I guess I could say I'm okay. You become worried about seeing things like that sometimes when you're dealing with mental illness, because from 1 minute to the next. Next I'm fine now, and next 10 minutes I'm crying, and I don't understand why. And it's hard to put yourself out there. It's hard to talk to people who you love and talk to them about your issues, talk to them about your depression. But what I'm realizing is that it's better just to be open and honest. We deal with way too many suicides in this country. Friends, I've had friends who've killed themselves, and it's not an easy thing to deal with. You don't ever really get over it. And I don't think you ever really get over it once you've tried to commit suicide, because it's one of those things that it stays with you. It weighs heavy on you. But at the same time, you don't know how to deal. Your emotions are all over the place. You're alienating yourself from everyone who you know. Things that used to interest you don't interest you anymore. All you want to do is sleep. You're not taking care of yourself, of others. Everything just goes to shit. And it's one of, if not the most difficult thing that I've had to deal with in my life. My hopes is that people start to feel more comfortable talking about these things, because it's so debilitating, and keeping these things inside helps no one. There's so many people suffering in silence, and to be honest, that's why one of the many reasons on my personal Facebook why I'm very, 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 and I would say very, I'd add a couple more varies, and they're very open about my illness, about my struggles. I'll post whatever I think is going to help the next person. I've posted side by side comparisons. One, photo of me fine, and then the next photo of me crying, and just to show that, you know, this happens within minutes of each other, sometimes hours, sometimes days. Sometimes you think it's gone, and you soon realize that it's not. I have friends and family and acquaintances who don't really understand what it's like to deal with these things, and that makes it even more difficult because I'm very honest about my mental illness. I've reached out when I felt like I was on the border of committing suicide or something. I've very much reached out. I've screamed at the top of my lungs, this is how I feel, and this is what I need, and nothing. You know what I mean? It just gets to be so tiresome because you're trying to make a difference. You know what I mean? And not only are you trying to make a difference, you're seeking help. You know, and everyone's just so caught up in their lives and caught up in what's going on, and it's completely understandable. Life is a bitch, man. Life is hard to deal with, but sometimes I just wish that the people closest to me would take it a lot more seriously, because the reality is I could be here today and gone tomorrow, and I've had those thoughts. I've had those moments where I've reached out, and for whatever reason, I don't get the support. And that's what I'm hoping ends. I know it won't end by the end of this video. I know a million other people can make videos about bipolar, and it probably still won't change. But creating awareness around it, I think, is the most important thing. And that's my goal, is to show people that you can live a normal life with bipolar. As of now, I'm not on any medication. I have no therapist, no psychiatrist. A lot of that's more due to the healthcare system here. It's not 100% by choice. But as far as the medication, yes, the medication is by choice. I've chosen to tackle this without medication. I realize that that only makes things a million times harder. And there is a danger there, because when you're in your lows and the low of the lows, you have to bring yourself out. And it's not the easiest thing to do, you know, and that's why I don't knock anyone who takes medication or needs medication, because it's something that people need, you know what I mean? It's who am I, you know what I mean? It just didn't work for me. And maybe it could be that I didn't find the right cocktail, so to say, but it wasn't for me. It just wasn't what I wanted for my life. I'm only 30 now. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life taking medication for something, for an illness that isn't ever going to go away. It's something that stays with you till you die, and it's also hereditary. So there's complications there as well, you know. But again, the reason we speak about these things is so that others know that they aren't alone. You're not alone. Many, many, many people deal with this illness, whether it's bipolar or depression or anxiety, panic attacks. We have to be there for each other. And I think that that's one of the main ideas of me putting myself out there, is that I'd rather talk to you for however long it takes than to sit there and listen to your eulogy, you know, or to find out later that you've taken your own life, and there's something that I could have done about it, or we just have to be there for each other more. And as a society, as a community, a global community, we have to care, because mental illness affects 1 in 4 people. You know, if you're in a family, you know, if you got your mom, your dad, and brother and yourself, or sister and yourself, or whatever, there's four of you, one of you are dealing with mental illness, you know, and it's so common. It's so common, and it's not spoken about. It's not accepted, for lack of better words. You know, it's it's a stigma. You know what I mean? It's a burden. You know, if I mean, last time you had to call out from work, what do you tell your boss? Do you tell him that you're physically not feeling well? Oh, my stomach hurts, or, you know, or I got the runs, or, you know, I got explosive diarrhea. You know, there's there's, and I've used that one quite a few times. So, but but when's the last time you can call your boss and tell him that you're not feeling well? You know, and he asks why, and you're saying, hey, I'm crying. I don't know why I'm crying. Or I feel horrible. You know, I feel like there's no hope left. I feel there's none of that. That's not, you're not going to have a job by the end of the day, probably, because what you're told to do is to put on your big boy pants or big girl pants and suck it up and just go to work and do the things that you have to do. And if it wasn't for that, I mean, if we could just be honest with each other and approach each other with perfect love and perfect trust, and just admit that we're not okay. To call a friend or to text a friend and say, hey, listen, I'm not okay today. It means the world. You could save so many lives just by caring, just by reaching out to people who need your guidance. Because the reality is, we all fight a battle inside, you know, and that's why I try really hard not to knock anyone. I mean, I'm not perfect. I have my moments where I'm just as judgmental as the next person. But I try really, really hard to come to a place of understanding and try to meet people where they're at now and not where I think they should be. Because I think too often people, whether it's in a relationship, whether that be physical or a friendship or any type of relationship, I think we often go into it sometimes seeing a person and thinking to ourselves, this is how that person can be better. And this is where I think that person should be. And this is what I think that person should do. And the reality is, it's not right. You know what I mean? We have to learn to meet people where they are at now and accept them and love them for who they decide to be today and tomorrow and the next day. And it's difficult. It's not easy. You know what I mean? But we have to get to a place where we're accepting each other's faults, we're accepting each other's flaws, and loving each other through it. One thing that I've learned with dealing with mental illness, that it's really important who you surround yourself around, especially who you're dating. Let's just be frank. I'll share a personal story with you very briefly. I wouldn't even call it a relationship. I was seeing someone, and I thought that the person was really good for my mental health. Why did I think this? They would ask, how are you doing? How are you feeling? They would assure me that my mental illness was not too much for them to handle and that they've dealt with 20 times worse. But I think that what we have to remember is that there's people sometimes inherently have this desire to say what you want to hear. And it's up to you to really judge, you know, and weigh out the pros and the cons, because people will tell you things that you want to hear. People will tell you that your mental illness is not a big deal. And the second you dissociate, it's an issue. And recently that's happened to me, more than once. More than once. But it's something you live with. It's something you learn. You learn to live with it. You know what I mean? And what's important is that you find people who who don't make you feel like you're a burden. Find people who you can call, who you can pick up the phone and text any hour and just tell them, hey, I'm not feeling okay. Because the reality is, I'd rather see you here than 6 feet under. And I really think that that person would rather see you here too as well, other than 6 feet under. Of course, remember, people are going through their own things, people are going through their own battles. And it's one of those things where you have to be patient and you have to understand that we all come with different battles that we're fighting. And it's important for us to be there for others just as much as others be there for us. And it's 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 not easy. It's not easy. It's even right now it's not easy making this video because you make yourself vulnerable, and you put yourself out there and then you're known as ABCD or whatever, and now you have to live with that image. So I just like to point out that even if you are living with mental illness, even if you are living with bipolar, there's a way through. That might be through medication, that might be through doctors and therapy, and maybe it might be spiritual. For me, I know that it's a lot more spiritual than it is anything else. I believe that the universe is guiding me and that I'm on the right path. And, you go from there. But just know that you're not alone. You're not dealing with this alone. And I hope that maybe by me being I guess you could say, just open and honest about my situations, and while I didn't go into too much detail, I just hope that we can get to a place where we can talk about this stuff freely. And yeah, that's pretty much the first video. I'm hoping to make more videos like this, just more like a video diary or something like that, just to record what's going on and to talk more about things like this, because I do believe that it is important that there's more exposure with things like this and how to cope, and people just talking honestly and openly about the things that they go through when dealing with mental illness. But I'd like to thank you for your time, and I hope we see each other again.